Hi there. So this is sketchbook number 13, and as you can see, it's going from July 2024 right up to April 2025 of this year. So it's been a while since I've posted one of these actually onto my YouTube channel. So here goes. Um, the obligatory first page, or first couple of pages actually, of just kind of getting to know the pens again after a short while away. It's always quite nice at the front and back of each sketchbook that I keep, just to sort of jot down little comments and things like that, or mixing up colours and sort of ideas for different bits and pieces that I'm thinking of doing later on. So that's all this one is really. I think it's just a scene from um, outside a London pub earlier this year, just in the evening, just before I got the train back to Ramsgate, where I now live. Um, and the usual, the first couple of pages really are just what I like to do with all of these. And if you've viewed these videos before, you'll see a couple of bits and pieces of ticket stubs and things like that from my travels. It just kind of adds to the whole sort of sketchbook experience whenever someone's looking through them. So this is the first real one. This is the in Ramsgate, just up the way, in Pegwell Bay, which is a couple of miles up the road, up the coast. There's a Viking ship called Hugin, and it's basically a replica of a longship. That so this actual one sailed from Denmark in the late 40s to commemorate I think it was the 1,500 anniversary of the sort of Anglo-Saxon chieftains coming over to this country. Um, so it's on permanent display. It's actually in Viking Bay, just up the coast, as I say. So it was a really nice afternoon. Walked all the way, just did this quick sketch, and just went for a coffee afterwards. And it was just a really nice summer's day, and really, because it's the first page in the sketchbook, and I'm sure everyone that keeps a sketchbook, you will completely understand this about what comes first in the sketchbook. It's all very tentative, isn't it? So I just thought I'd just go to town and play around with some colours. I've got a collection of pens here that I actually use, different variations of pens, so I'll talk you through that as well as I'm going through the sketchbook. But really, this one's very loose, particularly the background. I just wanted to have a very loose background, and then concentrating on the detail. Again, just using a Posca pen, a purple one. The old familiar Posca pens, again, if you've watched these videos before, the 0.7 nibs. And this was coming back, this was on the same day actually, Ramsgate Carnival, just up on Government Acre near Pugin House. And yeah, just lots of excitement. It was a really nice summer day. People kind of milling around, grabbing food, going on the rides. And I just sort of sat on the hill there and documented it for about an hour or so, using various combinations of colours, really going to town with all the sort of background work as well, and again just experimenting. So two decent sketches from that day, and then a little while later, I actually had a day out. This is the only one in the sketchbook that I did, but I had a lot of loose pages already painted up, and again, if you follow my Instagram account, you'll sort of notice occasionally, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, especially when the weather's nice, I'll sort of pre-prepare um, bits of sort of coloured paper and paint on them beforehand, and really just have a clipboard, A4 size clipboard, nothing bigger than that. But this one was actually a day out in Whitstable, which again is just up the coast, maybe 30 minutes on the train from here. But this is the only one in the sketchbook that I did. And it's just kind of looking over the sort of harbour wall, if you like, at this fishing boat. So this is low tide. This is why it's so low down from the actual edge of the harbour there. This was the last sketch of the day. So if you go onto a post from round about sort of mid 2024, that the sort of I guess this time last year, you'll sort of see a little short film that I put together, a little reel. And this was just as a demonstration piece. I walked down very early in the morning to Broadstairs, which is only 25-minute walk away from here in Ramsgate on the southeast coast, just to document an Eventbrite talk I was doing, again, round about this time last year, in connection with drawing buildings. And this is a familiar site. There's sort of circles all the way around. And these particular sort of fishing boats were always here, and obviously, as you can tell, it's low tide. So again, just sort of experimenting with the colours. And this one as well, really just more or less doing like a 180-degree turn. So if you imagine that one being here, and the view on the next page is kind of turning around to face this way. Dealing with shadows, that was one of the subjects of the Eventbrite talk. Not just buildings, but how you construct buildings. How sometimes it helps to actually put shadows in as well to kind of block out certain images. And these would just be with these slightly chunkier Posca pens. This one grey, and also these Tom Brow, I think they're called, brush pens. So you've got very thin, which I very rarely use actually. Just a thin one on this end, but the one that I always use is the sort of brush pen end. If you can see that. So just to get certain brush marks, very sort of quick, just to kind of lay down the shadows, and it really helps to just figure out the dimensions and where you're going to plan out the actual fine line pen work later on. It saves a lot of time actually. It's something that I've been getting into over the past year or so on my travels. So these next couple are a day out in London, again from about a year ago. Leicester Square, the Hippodrome opposite. I took some time with this one because obviously the building itself, if you've ever seen it, is very detailed. And this colour combination seems to work out quite well. I've done this quite a few times, these three colours. And again, I've talked about it so many times, but just to create the illusion of depth, not even to have a similar colour like a dark blue and then a light blue for the background. This is purple and this is sort of like a, this is pink, and then this is like a sandy colour, sort of peach colour. I think it was this pen that I used actually, the chunky sort of Posca marker for this bit, because the detail was quite specific. So it really helped just to get this block of colour in here. And as soon as I tackled, to begin with, this block of peach was the very first thing that I did. And then the second section, just to kind of get everything in place, that didn't take too long, were the sort of purple darker lines of the Leicester Square sign here at the edge of this building, and then this lamppost with an advert for the musical that's just around the corner, 39 Steps. And then I just went into, so as soon as I got this placement figured out, it wasn't too difficult to actually go into the structure, and I sort of started out around about here. In fact, I probably started out with the top bit to make sure I got everything in that I needed to. And it's such a beautiful, ornate building. There's so many of these kind of buildings, as you can imagine, around London. The Houses of Parliament, from quite a strange angle, well, not so strange, but from Westminster Bridge looking back towards Vauxhall. And I think that's Lambeth Bridge and all the developments that are happening over this way. But it's just such a great angle because there's so much detail here in the sort of Gothic revival style architecture, and really all the rest of it is from sort of this point onwards, very suggestive marks. It may look like it's quite detailed, but actually when you get up close, it's really not very detailed at all. It's as long as you get the structure in, and it's really almost an optical illusion. And I think your mind sort of fills in the rest of the blanks, especially when you're documenting a building that's so well known, your mind sort of tends to do the rest of the work because we've seen this particular building, for example, so many times before. But it was just the angle that interested me. Um, and there was lots of jostling for position because this is Westminster Bridge looking over towards Vauxhall. It gets very busy, it gets very loud. So it was a real um, test of patience, I guess, just to get the lines down because there were so many things happening around me, police cars going by, sirens, ambulances, going up to Camden Lock. I think this is all in the same. No, it's actually not in the same day. This probably a couple of weeks later to Camden Lock. Now I realised I hadn't been up into North London before because I used to live in South East London, and I've documented that part of the city quite a lot, and particularly Central London because there's so much to document. Why wouldn't you? But there's parts of North London that I hadn't been back to in over 20 years, so it's quite nice to have half a day in Camden Lock and have a walk around, have some lunch. And I'd forgotten how bustling and how vibrant it was actually. So again, just a couple of colours, just really going to town with placement, blocks. I think I got into a routine of doing this for a while. This was Westminster Abbey. Actually, this was the same day as this one. Yeah, now I remember. And it wasn't a particularly successful, if you're looking at it on here now, the colours, because they don't really sort of gel together, they're not kind of reacting, this sandy colour background with this light purple penwork. And I tried to sort of fix it when I posted it on Instagram. And as I'm looking at it now on through the camera as I'm filming this, it's a lot darker in reality than actually what's here. It's a lot subtler on the page, so I'll try and figure out the display and brightness for when I post this onto YouTube. But um, it was a successful day, and I'd never been to Westminster Abbey before, um, and I got all the detail in that I needed to get in. But I just think possibly if this block of yellow was removed, this yellow ochre, it would have been a more successful sketch. You would have been able to see the detailed work a lot clearer. But you know, sometimes you take a gamble, sometimes it pays off, and sometimes you're really happy with it, and then other times not so much. There was so much to document in this abbey, as you can imagine. The history of it is just amazing, just goes back over 1,000 years. So I was walking around for at least 20, 30 minutes before I could really decide on a viewpoint and settle into a sketch. St Bartholomew's in Smithfield. So I mean, there's so much history behind this church. This was founded in the early 1100s, I think. Um, so a lot of the original building still survives, and I just love the way that it's sort of been added to over the years. So this bit would have been original, and then over the centuries, you can clearly see with each century things that have been added right up until the sort of 17th, 18th century, the last bits and the last sections to be added. But it's a very beautiful, peaceful part of London, you know, Farringdon, Smithfield. And I think these were on the same day as well, this Guildhall Yard. And I'm really fascinated with, and I've done it recently as well, going back to London, I'm just fascinated with any sort of old structures, particularly churches that are still standing in this kind of metropolis of ever changing, you know, steel and glass. This one's a very good example, and I think this. I wasn't planning to sketch this particular one actually, but and I think these happy accidents are always quite often the most successful ones. And I'd seen pictures of it before, but then when I walked past to try and get to this one, which is literally just kind of, you know, just round the corner, um, I sort of knew that I had to sketch this one as well. So they actually didn't take that long because there's not too much detail in each sketch. And I'm only using two colours to, again, create that illusion of depth with each one, using the very thin Posca pens, 0.7 nibs. I swear by them. It's just working out the actual vanishing points and the angles of the buildings. It's quite repetitive, and it can be quite arduous sometimes with some of these new modern buildings because there aren't very much to them. But it is important for me, at least, to kind of get the sort of vanishing point right and the angles, and then the rest of it is just kind of filling in. But I think it's more it's sort of more to the point. Has more of an impact when the whole page has been filled in. These two were a trip back to Nottingham, where I grew up originally. You could probably tell by the accent there. This is Nottingham. So I worked later on from a photo because I was just kind of passing through on my way home. So some of this I started, and then some of it I kind of took photos and finished it off later on. But this is Nottingham city centre. I'd like to go back at some point and have a full day of sketching in Nottingham because the architecture is so unique, so beautiful. And in the city centre itself, a lot of it is still there, which is quite unusual for a big city. And this is Mansfield. This is just up the road from where I originally come from, where I grew up. And this is the very early in the morning, quite a chilly late September day last year. So getting to about this time last year, actually. Yeah, I'm recording this on the 12th of September 2025, so yeah. And they're just, the vans and the market stalls setting up for the day. And back in London, quick sketching. Don't normally use black in my sketches, but I've been using a brush pen for the past year or so, and it's been a really good one. It's a Unipen fine line brush pen. So it's very simple, but it's the brush, the tip is very strong, and it stays. It lasts quite a long time. So again, with these Tom Brow brush pens, a grey one, the statue of Eros, Piccadilly Circus. I've documented this from so many angles, so many times. And this one before I left. I like filling pages like this sometimes because they don't take too long, and just using one pen and just having a bit of fun with documenting people, either taking selfies, taking photos of someone else, just on their lunch hour, just a bit of quiet time. They're waiting. It's a meeting point for a lot of people because everyone knows where Piccadilly Circus is. So this probably took about 20 minutes, and it's just a really nice, starting with someone's head, and that leads into someone's backpack and then somebody else's leg here. So I love the sort of randomness of it because it doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's just documenting bits of people, if you like. They don't often stay in one spot for too long. Some people do sort of stand around and chat for quite a long time, and you've got plenty of time. You've got ample time to capture the essence of that person. But I'd say 80% of people, wherever they are, don't stay too long. They take a photo, they look at their phone, and then they go somewhere else. And this is Denmark Street, the music street of London, just around the corner from Soho. And this is Justin and Steve that run the place. And they were very happy for me to just wander in and sit and sketch for about an hour or so. And they were really pleased with the results, and we've kept in contact, and it would be lovely to go back, actually. I was quite tentative because it's quite a small shop, and lots of musos coming in, and I sort of feared that I was going to be in the way, but it wasn't at all. They were absolutely fine with it, and it was a really nice afternoon. Again, you can, from about a year ago, you can see that on my Instagram page, documenting that afternoon. And again, I thought it was quite essential just to with the block color work, just to save myself a lot of time because I didn't want to be in their way for too long. So these stack of amps here, I decided to go in with a chunky marker. I think it might have been this very same Liquitex. So when Posca don't do certain colours, I go with Liquitex. I found these ones sort of relatively recently that do the job, and they tend to sort of dry up. This is why it's having problems taking this one off. They can be a little bit unpredictable when you're shaking them up. They can sort of splurt a little bit, but they do some really nice colours. So Liquitex chunky pens. And this was in Canterbury, very quick sketch. I just been to the local art shop to just buy some new pens, just testing them out. Pretty pleased with the result of that. Just a nice afternoon. So this is Istanbul. This is, I think, the only trip abroad from this particular sketchbook from last year. So this was October, late October, and I'd wanted to go for some time, so I went over for about 5 days, and I'd never been before. Absolutely loved the place. This particular sketch came later on. I'm not quite sure why the order is sort of messed up a little bit. But this one was actually on my second or third day, the Basilica Cistern, which is one of the largest ancient cisterns beneath the city. I think it dates back to about the 5th or 6th century. And it's quite dark down there, and it's actually really beautiful if you get a chance to, if you're ever in Istanbul. It's such a beautiful sight, and there's quite a lot of tourists, and it's quite dark down there, so it was quite testing. But it didn't take me long for that reason. So it actually worked out. Actually, a lot of this, if you look at it, it's actually not that detailed. So I just went in with a very clear idea of not to do that, because this was one of the main kind of structures within the Basilica Cistern that people kind of gravitate towards, take photos, take selfies with. So I was very conscious that I might be getting in people's way. And actually, when I turned up, I wasn't. I managed to find a good spot, sort of tucked into the corner, but people were walking past pretty constantly. So I was getting little snippets of it and filling in the blanks. So it was really useful to take, again, these sort of brush pens, the Tombow AB brush pens, to really figure out the block work. And as soon as I figured out the arches and where these blocks were, and as you can see, it's all very, very rough pen work. And this section here in particular, which takes up pretty much half of this page, is just takes literally 10 seconds just to get the sort of arches and the columns that sort of fade out into the background. And I thought that was the best way of tackling it, just to save time. And then going in with the detailed work with this pen that I've really got into over the past year or so. And it's not one that I would normally use. It's a brush pen, but it's actually a gold coloured brush pen. But when you're drawing onto the white page or onto a particular surface that you've already coloured, like I have here, this is a good example. It doesn't come out as gold. It comes out as like a very dark sort of yellow ochre, almost brown. But it works really well for subtle shadow work that I really wanted here. So actually worked out quite well. So that was a very quick one, but I was actually quite pleased with the results. But it was just out of necessity, really. Well, this was the very first one on the first afternoon. So I checked myself into my Airbnb and walked around the Balat district. And this was a particular cafe, the Baraka Balat Cafe on the top of the hill. It's quite a well-known one, so you look down and it's just an amazing view. And they were so nice to me. They were just, on the balcony there, and they provided a chair for me to sit on, and I sat there for probably about an hour and a half to document everything. Really wanted to take my time with this because it was the first one, and it was such an amazing view, and I really wanted to do a good job of it. And this was just me from my balcony, the view that I had, just messing around with some colours, really. All the block work. So I didn't post this one. This was a little bit messy, but still fairly decent nonetheless. And looking over the Bosphorus, so you have the Galata Tower and the sort of Galata Bridge just on the right here. And these are the sort of golden flotilla boats that sort of go out onto the well, just onto the sort of Golden Horn, onto the river there. So I just thought the composition was really nice on this. So there's only a couple of colours, good colour combination. Again, just experimenting. Didn't plan on this one, but this was a very central part just before I walked over the bridge. I think this came a little bit later on, possibly the next day. Ortaco Mosque. I really messed up on that pronunciation, but it's a little bit further down on the water side. It's one of the most popular locations, and there's loads of restaurants around there, and people sort of feeding the pigeons. It's a very popular spot for wedding photography and things like that. It's a beautiful spot, and sort of people noticing what I was doing, and a guy actually sitting next to me for probably about 30 minutes, a young guy who was a waiter in one of the restaurants across the way, and he was on his lunch break, and he was fascinated with what I was doing. So that's a really nice memory. And again, I've talked about this a fair bit, about especially when you travel to foreign countries and you're meeting new people, and it's the experiences that you remember when you look at these sketches in the book. And this is Galata Bridge. They have a lot of amateur sort of fishermen that just sort of keep their rods sort of over the edge and sit there all afternoon, really. Some of them are there for hours, and it was just a really nice sight. And this one actually worked really well. It was one of the most popular ones when I posted it. I think just because of the two colour combination, and again, it was the brush pen for the dark work for the foreground, and then the background, a really nice coral coloured Posca pen. Not that one, that's burgundy, but me just kind of messing around with colour combinations. Didn't particularly work, but I didn't mind back in London. I think this was just over the Royal Courts of Justice building, somewhere around there, the Old Bailey. This one was the Museum of the Order of St. John. So it's a really old building in Farringdon, and again, going back to this metallic brush pen that has no metallic aspect to it at all, but it's just a really nice effect sometimes. It depends what you're sort of laying it over to begin with. But just this archway with this tree. And it's one that I didn't sort of particularly finish. I was concentrating more on the detail of the central area rather than spreading everything out like I normally do with a lot of sketches where it's kind of filling the page. I thought that was quite interesting. So I was sort of pulling back almost. This was a day trip to Ghent in Belgium, so that was just an idea I had. Cheap tickets on Eurostar, so from King's Cross in London, just getting a Eurostar over there very early in the morning, and just having enough time. The weather wasn't great, so I only had time for this particular sketch, and then this one that I started that I finished later on once I came home. This one I actually started in situ, and then working from a photo I took of some beer that I had later on in the afternoon. But this was a really nice colour combination, and this was typical of the architecture. Absolutely beautiful. And again, it's always quite a challenge, particularly with the Belgian sort of Flemish kind of architecture of the period, where it's all kind of stepped. So just to get everything, as well as the sort of vanishing point and the angle of the building that's sort of naturally kind of tapering this way, sort of the lines following naturally going this way, but also coming down. So there's a lot to contend with, a lot of concentration needed. But it was fun. It was a great day, and I should do more of that actually, because it's so close and there's more options opening up. Different parts of Germany, different parts of Belgium that you can easily get to in a day, have a couple of hours, have lunch, do some sketching, come back. A very long day, but so that was those ones. And this is back in London. So this was just a couple of weeks before Christmas. St Mary le Strand Church, and I hadn't done one in just one colour before, actually, for quite a long time. So this was the red wine, burgundy coloured Oscar pen, again 0.7 nib. And they've actually pedestrianised this section now. It used to have sort of taxis and bus routes sort of coming through, and it was quite a busy route. But it's really nice now. They put seating areas and people coming out of offices having their lunch. So that was quite a nice, successful sketch, because actually, again, from a distance, there is detail, and there are sort of certain sections that are sort of fairly detailed, but as a whole, it's actually not that detailed, if that makes sense. If you're looking at the tree lines, and obviously we're sort of into winter by this point, so there's no leaves anyway. But just looking at, it's the whole sort of less is more theory. So you're kind of hinting that there's a tree there, but you don't have to put the whole tree in there. It's not necessary. And it's the same with architecture as well. A very rough, very quick, very cold sketch in Deal that's just up the coast from me. Again, just experimenting with colours. Some dog walkers. And this was in Peckham, excuse me, where I spent about 20 years, from 2000 to 25 years actually, from around about 2000, 2001 to about 2022. So I saw the whole gentrification of this place, and it was always a great place to live anyway, but just to see it all sort of revived, and all these small businesses coming in, all these delicatessens, all the restaurants, all the bars, and it's absolute madness now. It's brilliant to go back, but just catching up with friends. So we had lunch just kind of around about here, I think. So I had just enough time before I met up with them to do a sketch. And again, it's very loose. I didn't want to take too long over it because I was running out of time, but my intention anyway was to just sometimes not even fill in a block of colour to sort of direct me into a building, to sort of try and get the shape of that building, but just to actually go in with one of these thick markers and actually really just sort of literally scrub a mark out onto the central section of the sketchbook, because it's always and still for me now it's slightly daunting when you come to a particular composition that you want to put down on the page, and when it's just a blank page, you don't really know where to start, so you just kind of grab anything to hand. You grab the chunkiest marker just to sort of put anything down on the page, just so that it sort of focuses you a little bit more, and you think, okay, what do I do with this now? and then you start figuring out a basic kind of structure of particular parts, and then you're away. But I really like this one. It was one of the more successful pieces, just because I'm getting hints of people walking past. It was obviously a lot busier than this, and the sort of traffic coming by on regular intervals. And then back home in Ramsgate, and this was the yacht club. It's one of the best views of Ramsgate, looking out over the marina. So this is the walk as you sort of come up, and then you turn left, and then there's a sort of a top part here where you can look out over the marina to the sea. But I always liked this little walkway up, because you can look back and you can see little sections of the brasserie restaurant at the end of the harbour there, and then all the boats, all the sailboats, and then this kind of walkway here. Again, just with two colours, just having a bit of fun. So these next ones, these are quite sort of interesting for me, because I really wanted to loosen up the we're into this year now, early March, and I just wanted to loosen up the style a little bit to again work with these chunky markers, and just to, in a way, go back to basics, not be so detailed with the work that I was producing, but just to sort of free myself up, I suppose, from those sort of confines that I'd built for myself of using these very thin Posca pens, and everything had to be so detailed, and actually breaking out of that for a while, and having some fun with some really gaudy colours. And as long as there was some kind of structure there, that was my only sort of brief for myself. And what I found really useful was just to go in with these aqua colour or these blue sort of colours. These colours were just sort of what I had to hand, but they seemed to work really well. So I continued on in that sort of theme. But just to blend them in with the black brush pen of just the outline and a tiny little bit of detail around this particular boat that was being worked on, that was in dry dock, and just working very loosely with these Caran d'Ache pencil crayons, very decent ones, just really sort of scratching into it and making some mess, because there was a lot of debris on the floor and bits and pieces, and it just really didn't matter. I was just kind of having fun and playing around, really, and it produced some really interesting results. This one maybe not so successful, but I like certain elements, certain unfinished bits. And another one in the same spot but looking in a different direction. This was a little time later. But again, we're only using maybe 4 colours in this. So we're using a very chunky light blue, and then we've got some, which I don't normally use because they're quite dull, but different tones of grey that I had from a previous job. So I wanted to make good use of them. So there's a slightly darker grey here, slightly lighter grey with the brush pen. And then as long as you're getting highlights, as long as you're getting sort of a little bit of subtle detail in the tops of some of the boats here with this line work. So it's all very suggestive, and just lines to just incorporate and just to fix in, I suppose, the shape. So as long as you get a fairly accurate description of the shape of the boat. And I just loved coming back to these really dark shadows, because it wasn't the height of the summer, but it was a really sunny, particularly sunny weekend. So you have that very kind of low sun coming in at a certain time of day, and it creates these really dark shadows that really fascinated me. And that's all they are, really. So again, there's a certain section in the marina where there's a lot of boats and yachts, where some of them are quite expensive, that are up in dry dock. People are working on them. This little Fiat car from the 60s that's been parked there forever. Nobody seems to know whose it belongs to. So just incorporating all this and just going in, it's just very subtle. You know, the marks that I'm making here are just taking only 5 minutes or so, less, and then just even thinner lines just for the wire that's kind of holding up all the masks, and not going into too much detail, just letting the mark making do the work. So I'm sort of entering into a different phase with these ones, really enjoying it. So how suggestive can you be with very dark shadows, very deep, late March, early April, spring shadows on these boats without doing too much work? So there's certain bits that work with this and certain bits that don't. But I sort of really like this section here, excuse me, because this boat is obviously in the background, so it's a grayer sort of section, and this bit is sort of closer. So we're still dealing with that that aspect of background, foreground with the colour, but just using different pens instead of Posca ones for a change, and getting different interesting compositions. And I've always been fascinated with composition anyway, just to try different things, whether it's architecture, whether it's places in London or on my travels, not necessarily going with the obvious, trying something a little bit different. And then back to London again. This is slightly more obvious with the composition, actually, saying that, but I realised I hadn't. It's so fascinating to me because I don't live in London anymore. Every time I come back, which is not that often, but just to see friends or just to sort of hang out and go to a couple of galleries, there's always something happening in the central sort of financial district end of London. And this is the south side looking over to that way. And the Tower of London is just here, and Tower Bridge is just here. But just the amount of work that's kind of ongoing, amount of buildings that they seem to cram into this tiny space. People walking past, again, just using that whole sort of theory of just the darker in the foreground with these people, just to capture them sort of taking selfies or taking photos of this particular site. And this is the Bankside, the Anchor pub, meant to be one of the oldest on the Thames there, with Nando's next door. Then a tiny part of the Shard in the background. So we're trying to encapsulate quite a lot of what's happening in this particular district, this particular area. And then we come on to, I think, the last section of the sketchbook. Actually, it's this is the Cornish Craft Barn Company. We're running an urban sketching workshop in Truro in Cornwall, and they asked me to go down late March of this year. So I spent a weekend just with a lot of urban sketches going around the town, and it was fantastic, just for sort of Friday and Saturday. And I had a lot of time to spare. I think it was a bank holiday. Had a couple of days to myself afterwards, so just wandering around doing my own thing, and it was great, you know. So this was a particular spot in Truro, with the cathedral in the background. So this is a sketch of, it's called the Leats, which is a little kind of riverway going sort of through Truro, if you like. This is one of the main streets at the front of these houses, if you can imagine, running parallel. And this is just off the busier section. And this is a lovely walkway. So you can see this is the first day, me trying to get some kind of impression of it. And the colours and the balance, it really wasn't working. And I think I was trying too hard to sort of work too much with too many, trying to work with too many colours, basically. And it just wasn't happening. So I gave it a rest and came to the same spot the next day and the whole less is more theory, and it worked for me. Just the coral colour of these buildings, just to keep it very simple, and then just have a splash of colour here. So you can see the difference between the two. It's pretty much the same pose, just to bring this composition slightly down so that we could get the angle and the vanishing point of these buildings. And it wasn't really happening with this, and I think it started to rain as well, so it wasn't a particularly successful afternoon. But then came back first thing the next day. My Airbnb place was just round the corner beyond this church here, so it was very close. Grabbed a coffee first thing, got it done, and I had the rest of the day to move on. But this was a day trip to Falmouth, so I did a couple here as well. Again, just documenting the town, the port, using pens of a similar colour. All of these little kind of throughways, these buildings here, and then you have the port with a huge kind of vessel, whatever that was, some kind of working tug, boat, carrier. And this one, I think this is the same boat, but further up. Found a really nice pub where you could sit outside. And this wasn't planned at all, but it just sort of happened upon in the back streets, and it was just a really nice viewpoint. So this was sort of late afternoon, and just decided to document that. And I love the strong shadows coming over at this point in the afternoon. This was central Truro. This was on the last day, actually, just before I got my train home. With the cathedral in the background, such beautiful architecture. A very simple one, just with the two colour process. This was Gadrivi Point. A friend of mine that I hooked up with, that I hadn't seen. I went to university with him many, many years ago, decades ago. And he still lives there in Camborne. So we met up, and he's a bit of a surfer, so he went off surfing with his friends for an hour, and I just went up to the top of the cliffs and documented this. It was a really nice morning. Then we all went for coffee afterwards. So it was great. It was a really successful holiday. Everyone seemed to enjoy me being there. Everyone got a lot out of it. I certainly got a lot of sketching out of it. Got to meet some new friends, and Damien, that runs the Cornish Craft Barn, if you look it up on Instagram, they do some amazing things. Hopefully getting back there at some point soon to do some more workshops. And the last couple of pages in the sketchbook is back in Ramsgate. So this is, I think it's still in the marina, actually. It's the Havengor. So it's actually a boat that was used to carry Winston Churchill's coffin down the Thames for his state funeral back in the mid-60s. And it was part of the Dunkirk. It was here for the Dunkirk celebrations, an anniversary of that was last year. So again, just a very simple process of a couple of colour combinations, using the chunky markers just to get down certain essentials, and really trying to get to grips with shadows and the simpleness of just using maybe 3 or 4 pens. I'm not a huge fan of, particularly when I go abroad, and I think, again, I've talked about this at great length on other posts, but just going out and taking loads of different pens, and I think I even made a short reel about it for an Eventbrite talk, just about preparing what to take when you go abroad. And it's not all about taking a huge amount of pens. The amount that I've got here, you can't see them all, they're sort of slightly off camera, but maybe twice as much as I've got in this kind of bundle here. Maybe a couple of brushes. That's all I take, as long as you plan out a little bit beforehand. So there we go. I think we're coming towards the end, and that's a Ramsgate sketch looking over. Again, 2-colour process. Quite a nice view over the marina, over the harbour. Such lovely sort of winding streets in this coastal town, as there are in many UK coastal towns. Very Victorian, very sort of closely knit houses. Lots of hills, lots of balconies, lots of really interesting structures. I think I'm coughing because I'm doing so much talking, excuse me. But I think this is the last sketch, yeah. So again, just really rough sketch of an old sort of tugboat in the harbour that's, I think, possibly still there. Just using all the sort of brush pens. It seems that the more places I see and experience, the bigger I realise the world to be. The more I become aware of, the more I realise how relatively little I know of it. How many places have I still to go? How much more there is to learn? Anthony Bourdain. And I think that's all there is to say, really. So thank you again for joining that talk. Click and subscribe and all of that, and I shall see you on the next one. Thanks very much.